The dust of Alexander's empire still hung in the wind long after his death. Across deserts and seas, the cities he built still gleamed: Alexandria, Antioch, Babylon. Ghostly reminders of a dream too vast for one man to contain. He had conquered the known world, but he left behind no heir strong enough to hold it. When the great conqueror died in Babylon, his generals divided his empire like scavengers at a feast. The mighty vision of one world under one ruler splintered into rival kingdoms: Macedonia, Egypt, the Seleucid East, each claiming to guard Alexander's legacy, each ready to destroy the others to keep it. Yet through all the wars and betrayals, one idea refused to die: Greece must never kneel to the West. For generations, Macedonia had stood as the protector of Greek power, the homeland of Alexander himself. Its kings still spoke of destiny, of the divine blood that ran through their veins. Among them rose a new ruler, Philip V, young, proud, and burning with the dream of restoring Alexander's world. He looked upon Greece not as fractured city-states, but as a single people who had once ruled the earth. If he could unite them again, he believed, Greece might yet rise to glory. But far across the sea, another power was watching. A republic born not of kings but of discipline. A people who built their strength not on dreams, but on order. Rome. To the Greeks, Rome was strange. A world without philosophers or poets, ruled by men of iron and law. They wore no crowns, built no palaces, and yet their armies crushed everything in their path. What Alexander's generals had done with genius, Rome did with precision. First, the Greeks laughed. How could these Western soldiers, these farmers from Italy, understand the art of empire? But Rome did not seek art, it sought control. And it was patient. As Macedon spread its influence once more across the Aegean, Rome began to move, not with armies, but with words, alliances, promises, diplomacy wrapped in steel. When the Greek city-states begged for protection from Macedonia, Rome answered their call. Philip saw the trap too late. In trying to rebuild Alexander's world, he had awakened a rival more dangerous than Persia ever was. The first Roman ships appeared off the Greek coast under the light of a burning sunset. The sound of oars struck the water like drums of fate. For the first time in history, the heirs of Alexander and the soldiers of Rome stood on the same battlefield. Two worlds, two legacies, one destiny. And somewhere, in the silence of time, the shadow of Alexander seemed to watch, as if daring Rome to prove itself worthy of what came next. In the marble halls of Pella, King Philip V of Macedonia stood before a colossal statue of Alexander. The conqueror's gaze was fixed eternally toward the east, yet Philip felt that the statue judged him. He had inherited the crown of warriors but not their world. Greece was divided, and the dream of empire was fading into dust. Still, Philip believed he was chosen to bring it back. He trained his armies in the ancient Macedonian way, the phalanx, a wall of men and iron, spears glinting like sunlight on the sea. Each soldier carried a sarissa, 6 meters long, so that even the air trembled when they moved as one. To his people, Philip promised revival. To the Greek city-states, he offered protection. But to many Greeks, protection from Macedonia felt too much like chains. They had tasted independence, and they would not kneel easily again. Athens, Rhodes, and Pergamon whispered of Rome, a republic that could humble kings. At first, Philip dismissed them. What was Rome to him? A backwater of farmers and merchants. They were not heirs of Achilles or students of Aristotle. They were ironmakers, not dreamers. Yet reports from the west grew darker. Roman legions had crushed Carthage's allies in Spain, their generals undefeated. Rome was spreading like fire, slow, cold, and permanent. Then came the spark that lit war. Philip's fleets raided the islands of the Aegean, threatening Rome's new friends. Envoys came from Greece pleading for help. The Senate debated only briefly. Rome did not hesitate when opportunity called. The First Macedonian War began quietly, without grand speeches or declarations. Roman ships slipped across the Adriatic, their oars beating in rhythm, bronze rams gleaming in daylight. Macedonian scouts watched from the cliffs, startled. For the first time in centuries, soldiers from the west had come to fight in the land of Homer. The battles were small but fierce. Skirmishes fought on rocky coasts and narrow valleys. The Macedonian phalanx moved like a living wall, unbreakable in open plains, but clumsy in hills and forests. Roman troops, lighter and more flexible, struck and vanished. They learned quickly, adapting with every encounter. Philip began to realize that this enemy was unlike any he had faced. The Romans did not chase glory. They sought control. They could lose a battle and still win the war. Across Greece, loyalties wavered. Some cities sided with Philip, drawn by the promise of Alexander's legacy. Others opened their gates to Rome, believing it would bring freedom. In truth, both sides were wrong. Years dragged on. The war ended with no grand victory, only exhaustion. A treaty was signed. Macedonia remained intact, but its pride was wounded. Rome withdrew across the sea, but its name lingered like a shadow on every Greek wall. In his final speech before the army, Philip tried to sound defiant. "We have endured Rome's strength," he said, "and proved that Macedonia still stands." But the soldiers were silent. They had seen the way the Romans fought, with patience, with order, without fear. That silence was the sound of the future. The first war had ended, but another was already forming beyond the horizon. Rome had tested the heirs of Alexander, and found them wanting. The shadow of the West was growing longer over Greece. The peace that followed was hollow. Macedonia had survived, but its power had cracked, and through the cracks, Rome's shadow crept silently into Greece. In Athens, philosophers toasted to freedom. In Corinth, merchants traded with Roman envoys. Across the marble cities, men spoke of liberation, not realizing they had already begun to bow. Rome had learned what every conqueror must, that victory through war is costly, but victory through illusion lasts forever. A decade later, a new Roman commander crossed the Aegean, Titus Quinctius Flamininus. Unlike other generals, he did not come shouting threats. He came offering promises. Peace, protection, freedom for every Greek who stood against Macedonia. To the weary city-states, his words were honey. To King Philip V, they were poison. Once again, armies gathered on the plains of Thessaly. The Macedonian phalanx glittered beneath the midday sun. Shields tight, spears thrust forward like the spines of a single creature. The Romans formed opposite them. Short swords, rectangular shields, and silence. The battle began in fog and confusion. The field of Cynoscephalae, the dogs' heads, was broken and hilly, no place for the perfect geometry of a phalanx. When Philip's front line advanced, his right wing surged ahead, but the left lagged behind. The formation bent, fractured, and in those gaps the Romans struck like wolves. The legion fought in small, quick units. They twisted between the long pikes, cutting down men who could not turn fast enough to defend themselves. The phalanx, mighty on open plains, died on uneven ground. When the dust settled, thousands of Macedonian spears lay shattered, and the earth ran red. Philip's army was broken. The king escaped, but the myth of Macedonian invincibility had died that day. When Flamininus entered Corinth, the crowds hailed him as a hero. At the Isthmian Games, before tens of thousands of Greeks, he stood and declared, "The Greeks are free to govern themselves, free from all kings." The stadium erupted. Men wept, women threw garlands, and even slaves cried with joy. Flamininus smiled and let them cheer. It was not a lie, not yet. But freedom, once given by Rome, was never truly free. Roman ambassadors stayed in every council. Roman gold decided every vote. And when Greek cities quarreled among themselves, as they always had, Rome was there to restore order. The eagle had spread its wings over Hellas, and the Greeks, in their gratitude, had invited it to stay. Behind the marble temples, Rome's conquest had already begun, not with legions but with promises. The cheers of freedom faded quickly. Rome's legions had returned home, but their influence stayed behind in Greek treasuries, in councils, in every argument between city-states. Macedonia watched silently, humiliated yet alive. And in the halls of Pella, a new king took the throne. Perseus, son of Philip V, heir to the shadow of Alexander's blood. Perseus had grown up in the ruins of glory. He had seen the way Rome smiled in public and schemed in secret, offering peace with one hand while tightening the noose with the other. His father had taught him one lesson before dying. Rome does not forgive equals. Perseus swore that he would not bow. He would rebuild Macedonia's pride and reclaim Greece's honor. He strengthened his army, rebuilt the economy, and rekindled the dream that Alexander had left behind. A Greece united, proud, and free from Rome's control. But Rome saw everything. Spies carried every whisper to the Senate. They spoke of Macedonian gold-buying allies in the Aegean, of new fortresses rising in the north, of soldiers drilling with renewed fire. Rome listened and prepared. When war came in 171 BC, it was inevitable. Rome claimed that Perseus had violated peace, but everyone knew the truth. Rome would never allow a Greek king to stand tall again. The Third Macedonian War began like a storm. Perseus commanded tens of thousands, proud soldiers armed with the long sarissa, marching in tight formation beneath the blazing summer sun. He believed that discipline and courage would be enough. He believed that the spirit of Alexander still walked with his army. But the Rome of this war was not the Rome of old. Its legions were now refined machines of conquest, adaptable, patient, and merciless. They crossed mountains and rivers with precision, their armor gleaming in the sunlight, their standards crowned with eagles that seemed to pierce the sky. The two forces finally met near Pydna in 168 BC, a vast plain beneath a burning sun, where the fate of the ancient world would be decided. At dawn, Perseus rode before his men. The phalanx stood ready, ranks of shields, spears pointing like a forest of steel. From a distance it looked invincible. He lifted his sword toward the rising sun. "Today," he shouted, "the sons of Alexander fight for Greece." Across the field, the Roman general Lucius Aemilius Paulus watched calmly. He knew the phalanx's weakness, its need for perfect order. He waited for the ground itself to turn against them. The battle began with thunder. The Macedonians advanced in slow, synchronized rhythm, shields locked, spears striking forward. The first Roman line bent, but did not break. Then came uneven ground, dips, stones, and ridges that shattered the formation's unity. Gaps opened between the Macedonian ranks. Paulus gave a single command. Roman maniples, small, fast units, surged into the spaces, cutting from within. The phalanx, once the pride of Alexander's world, was suddenly trapped, unable to turn, unable to defend. The long spears that ruled the plains were useless in close combat. The slaughter began. Roman short swords pierced under shields, cutting men apart at the knees and throat. The field turned red, the air thick with screams. The phalanx collapsed, its wall of iron dissolving into chaos. Perseus watched in disbelief. His army, his dream, was disintegrating before his eyes. He tried to rally his cavalry, but panic spread faster than orders. By sunset, tens of thousands of Macedonians lay dead. The last descendant of Alexander fled into the mountains. Within days he was captured. Rome paraded Perseus through its streets in chains, the final symbol of a fallen age. The Senate declared Macedonia dissolved. Its treasures were carried off, its armies disbanded, its people scattered. The bloodline of Alexander the Great had ended, not in glory, but in silence. And as Rome celebrated its triumph, the world that Alexander had once built, the temples, the philosophies, the pride of Greece, fell under a new master. The heirs of the conqueror had become the conquered. When the smoke cleared over Pydna, the world of Alexander was gone. The once mighty kingdom of Macedonia lay broken, its royal banners trampled into the dust. The fields that had echoed with the clash of phalanxes were now silent, littered with bronze shields, shattered spears, and the dead dreams of men who still believed Greece could defy Rome. In Rome, the Senate celebrated with thunderous applause. The great general Lucius Aemilius Paulus returned in triumph, his chariot gilded with Macedonian gold. Behind him walked the last king of Macedonia, Perseus, bound in chains, the blood of Alexander reduced to a prisoner. The people cheered, throwing flowers and coins as he passed. To them it was the end of an enemy. To history it was the end of an age. Rome wasted no time turning victory into permanence. Macedonia was carved into 4 separate republics, forbidden to trade or assemble armies. The Senate's message was clear: Greece would never rise united again. But even as Roman soldiers marched through Greek streets, not everyone bowed. In the southern cities, Corinth, Thebes, and Sparta, the old fire still burned. When the Achaean League rebelled years later, declaring that Greece would no longer live as Rome's servant, the Republic answered with cold fury. The Roman legions descended on Greece like a storm. They crushed every resistance, burned villages, and slaughtered rebels. Then came the final warning, the city of Corinth. In 146 BC, Roman legions surrounded it. The siege was short, brutal, and absolute. When the walls fell, the soldiers poured in, killing every man they found. Women and children were sold as slaves. Temples were looted, their gold melted down. Flames consumed the marble streets, and the smoke of Corinth darkened the sky. For days the city burned, its statues melting, its libraries turned to ash. When the fires finally died, Greece was silent. The land of philosophers and warriors, poets and kings, had become another province of Rome. And yet, in defeat, Greece triumphed in a way no army could. Roman generals sent their sons to study Greek philosophy. Roman poets learned to write in Greek meters. Greek art, science, and architecture filled the villas of Rome. Even the gods of Olympus were given Latin names and new altars. The empire that had conquered Greece slowly became Greece in spirit. Scipio Aemilianus, who had seen both Carthage and Corinth burn, once walked among the ruins and whispered, "Such is the fate of all cities, even ours." He understood what few others did. Every empire believes itself eternal until it too becomes a memory. The conquest of Greece was complete, but Rome could never escape the shadow of the world it had destroyed. Greece had lost its freedom, yet its ideas, its art, its mind conquered Rome from within. Centuries later, when the empire of the Caesars stretched from the Atlantic to the deserts of Arabia, it was still Greek thought that shaped its heart. From the marble columns of Athens to the Senate steps of Rome, the legacy of Alexander still whispered in the wind. Rome had taken Greece's land, but Greece had taken Rome's soul. And that was the true conquest,